start. Good afternoon and welcome to our side event on building capacity for managing human-wildlife conflict and coexistence. My name is Luna Milatovic and I work as the policy officer for the specialist group on human-wildlife conflict and coexistence. We're going to have two brief presentations and then have a very short, not a discussion because we don't have enough time for that, but some reflections about what I'm about to present. So before we focus on the topic of today's event, I just want to provide a very brief background on the scale of human-wildlife conflict that we have today. And it is truly a biodiversity, a global biodiversity challenge. And it's not just a challenge for biodiversity, it's a challenge for many people around the world who live with wildlife. And it's an issue in every single country. And I think if you even just look at countries that are elephant range states, that's already covering 1/4 of the whole world. So it really affects a huge range of species and a huge number of people. However, I think it's important to just mention that while we do consider human-wildlife conflict as something that involves interactions between wildlife and people, normally this is where the conflict happens. It's between groups of people who have different interests and they disagree on what should be done to mitigate the conflict. And I think this is something that we as the specialist group are really pushing forward to consider in every intervention, and it's something that it's really the core element in resolving this issue. Now, the scale of the issue has been recognized by countries who in 2022 also, they decided to include this in the wording of the Target 4 in the Global Biodiversity Framework. And while I don't want to, read the wording, I think it's just important to mention that this is the first time that human-wildlife conflict has been included in a major policy such as this one. So it really shows that it's an escalating issue and it's an issue that more and more countries are ready to try to resolve. Now, what's needed and where we come in is there's a really big need for a deeper understanding of the issues and a shift in how we think about the solutions and how we develop them. And we as the specialist group, we are a group of 50 people with different backgrounds, different regional focuses, different expertise. And we work together on gathering and providing information and knowledge, on facilitating collaboration and promoting interdisciplinary working, and also providing, developing guidance and advice to build capacities. Some of the ways we do this, I'm just going to quickly list them because I'm not sure everybody knows who we are. We host a big human-wildlife conflict and coexistence library where we not only have our policy and briefing documents, but we monthly update it with the latest science on the topic. And it also, we then compile this and share with people in a quarterly email newsletter. With our partner UN FAO, we worked on developing a series of coexistence case studies for which we also organize webinars. And then we work very closely with governments through our network of governmental focal points. This is a snapshot. We now have around 45 focal points, including 3 that are sitting with us today. So we are continuing to engage with governments, and if you are a government here, please come forward later if you're working on these issues and let me know, because we really want to establish a close connection with governments across the world. Very related to this, now that the human-wildlife conflict is in the GBF, one of our largest ongoing efforts at the moment is to try to come up with an indicator that will allow countries to monitor progress towards this part of the target. And for this, we established a working group with around 100 people from all different parts of the conservation work, but also CBD parties. And so far, we had 2 workshops. And this will continue until CBD COP later this year, where we plan to present the draft framework, hopefully developed by then. Last year in March, we organized a major cross-sectoral conference on this topic. It was the first of a kind, together with the World Bank, with UNDP, FAO, and Oxford University. And it was attended by around 500 delegates, including 45 to 50 governments. and it included a lot of different topics over a 3 days event. Now, one of our major products and something that we launched at the same conference last year is the guidelines for, on conflict and coexistence. And this is the first edition of the guidelines, and it provides some crucial foundations for and principles for good practice when it comes to managing human-wildlife conflict. And the aim of this is to deconstruct the complexity around these issues, to try to make it chewable and explain the processes step by step, and to provide some guiding principles for this. It was compiled by around 50 different contributors, and it's written for use by conservation practitioners, governments, community leaders, decision makers, whoever would like and needs. It's a good resource. At the moment, the first edition is in English and Portuguese, and very soon coming is French and Spanish and Chinese. And very, very soon now, it's my pleasure to launch the Russian edition that we prepared in collaboration and with support of our partners, the Royal Society for Protection of Birds. And you will find leaflets where you can download any of these editions, and the Russian one has been added today. So it's a really immense pleasure to use this event to launch it. Now, while 32 chapters in the guidelines are covering a range of topics, all of these are organized around some foundational principles. And the way this was done is to allow that these foundational principles can really be applied to understand and manage conflict across different contexts. It's not region-specific, it's not species-specific, it's really to tackle the essence of the conflict and not only a very context-specific case. Now, these principles, there are 5 of them, and I'm going to go quickly through them, and then we're going to have a deeper dive into 2 chapters. So the guidelines, while they are organized in these principles, at the beginning there's also a good practice checklist, which is intended to basically mirror these principles, and it contains 10 key questions. I know it's really hard to, focus everything on 10 key questions, but we really made an effort to do that, and it could be used as a reference together with the principles, and then you can go to the chapter that you need depending on your situation. So the first principle is do no harm. And this one focuses on the importance of identifying the level of the conflict, but also reflecting on your role. Sometimes as conservationists in these situations, we see things only from one side, and it's really important to understand what is your role in this situation, what are the interventions, are there any interventions that should be done, and it's really important to consider, will there be any unintended consequences of your intervention that can maybe escalate the conflict even more. The second one is to understand the context around the conflict, the issues, and this one is focused on how to assess the impact of the conflict, also the drivers, both ecological, the natural and ecological ones, but also how to consider the species behavior in this given situation. Then the chapters following that, they are focused on understanding the underlying issues, so social, historical, economical, and cultural, political issues. And the following chapters are mostly around understanding attitudes, tolerance, but also different forms of governance of human-wildlife conflict before thinking of the intervention. The third principle is focused on collaboration and co-management, because these are critical in every human-wildlife conflict situation. And in every initiative to mitigate it. It focuses on the importance of working with stakeholders and the communities, also on the integration of traditional knowledge where appropriate. Of course, it's not always needed, and also how to achieve co-design and good co-planning when making these interventions. One of the chapters is also focused on resolving conflict between people, and how to interact with the media in these very complex situations sometimes. The fourth principle is around integrating science and policy, and I think this is something that is now widely recognized as very much needed. And while we all know that every action to address human-wildlife conflict should be based in sound science, this section also gives you some essentials about the social and ecological research methods to do so, to assess and monitor human-wildlife conflict, and also what to consider when planning this on a larger landscape level. Then the second part of the section is mostly around governance, laws, policies that are needed for this. And we go to the final principle, which is to enable sustainable pathways. This one is kind of the most practical, and when people think about human-wildlife conflict, they will probably think of different mitigation and prevention strategies. And this one considers some of them. It also considers when to think about these approaches. So it has an overview of damage prevention methods on translocation, animal capture, and when needed, lethal control. And the last chapters are all about evaluating interventions and trying to have a very sustainable strategy and initiative. And with this, I would like to give the floor to Diogo Verissimo, who is one of the members of the specialist group, who co-authored 2 chapters, and he's going to give us a little bit of a deeper dive into these chapters. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Luna. Well, thank you very much, all of you all as well, for being part of this session. I'll be talking to you about the 2 of the chapters that I was part of. First one, which we don't have yet on the screen, but will now. All right, here we go. Thank you very much. It's appreciated. Focuses on evaluating interventions. And this is because if we don't know if something works, it is really difficult to decide whether we should scale it up. Should we repeat it somewhere else? Should we be having that as sort of lessons learned and to integrating that in our future work? It's really critical to understand what works and what doesn't. And often in conservation, we tend to really hope for the best and move forward, right? Because it's urgent, because time's running out and all of that. And it's understandable, but it's also important to realize that there are real consequences when we scale up a solution that maybe doesn't have the impact we'd like, or maybe even has the opposite effect to what we had hoped, right? And this is not as rare. We know from fields like public health, international development, which have more evidence than we do, that often things don't work as we hope. For whatever reason, the world's complicated, so it's difficult for us to achieve the goals we are hoping to achieve. Otherwise, we would have solved biodiversity conservation a long time ago, right? So it's not surprising. And so evaluation, although sometimes it's the first thing to fall by the wayside as soon as a donor, maybe the budget's not as big as we'd hope, or maybe the time is a little bit short, we sort of go, we'll evaluate the next one. It's actually really important, really critical to have a way of measuring what are the outcomes of all this work that we're putting on the ground. And so with this chapter, really what we're going through is, on one hand, talking about what it means to evaluate, what it means to measure impact, right? And so we break it down into sort of these 4 big steps, thinking about a theory of change. How do we expect this project, this program, this activity to actually change the world that we live in and lead to the changes in biodiversity that we all hope for? Then think about, what sort of information can we use in terms of indicators? What are the information that we need? Not necessarily the information that we have, because that's the other challenge we often face is we use the information we have rather than information we need. And that has impacts on our ability at the end to say very much about what happens. Did we achieve our goals? Well, often it's hard to tell. And then we need to choose a method, right? So it's important to also be aware that different activities, different disciplines, different types of programs can be evaluated and measured in very different ways. And sometimes, because maybe we come from a certain discipline or a certain area, where we're trained in a particular way, we tend to only see some of those methods. But actually, there's quite a lot of variety, and all of them have strengths and weaknesses, and it's important that we, think about which one suits our reality, budget-wise, time-wise, in terms of technical expertise. And so that's Something else that we do, we go through case studies, we talk about the different methods that were used in different situations, and then we talk about the pros and cons of different methods so that hopefully people can go through this list and decide what methods are most suitable to their particular situation, right? And because, again, this is just one method, there are many, in many ways that you can, in a valid, sort of robust way, understand whether you're achieving your goals with the activities that you're putting on the ground, right? So that was really the goal with that one. The second chapter focuses on this notion of behavior change. How can we influence the behavior of people to achieve the biodiversity outcomes or goals that we're hoping to get? And, you know, I come from a place where I think conservation is an exercise in human persuasion. You know, we go out there and we know that it's the snow leopard and the saiga and, you know, the eagles and the flamingos and all of that. But at the end of the day, whether the flamingos are there or the snow leopards are there, it's going to be a decision that's going to be made by people, and it's going to depend on what people end up doing and deciding at the end of the day. And so, you know, this chapter is one I feel is particularly important, but of course, you know, it's something that's close to my heart. So here in this one, what we do is we start by talking about different types of approaches, types of ways that we can try to influence people's behavior. Most of us will be familiar with education. It's one of the most popular mainstream ways that we can try to influence people, usually by giving them information about something. But there's other ways, which are quite different. And of course, another way is by making laws. We can make something legal or illegal or restrict it, only make it legal in certain conditions and contexts, right? But there's other ways, for example, this social marketing paradigm, this idea that we can try to persuade people very much a little bit like everyday businesses try to change our mind about the products that they try to sell us. Right? So we can use the same principles to try to get people to voluntarily change the way that they go about a certain activity, be it using a particular natural resource or the way they interact with you know, an animal or a plant or whatever that might be. And so what we did here is we're trying to make it as really as practical as possible. You know, I come from the University of Oxford, and sometimes that's a challenge. You know, I tend to get bogged down in the technical detail of things. But here, my colleagues very, very generously tried to, you know, help me, you know, make this as practical as possible. And here we break it down into these sort of six stages, really. So the understanding what needs to change. That's the first thing. What is it that we actually need to influence and get changed? The second one is thinking about who needs to change. Very often we tend to have this approach where we try to reach the biggest number of people possible. But often that's not the most effective way of going about things because not everyone, not everyone's relevant to the conservation issue that we care about. Often it's people that live nearby a particular area or who have the means to buy a particular product. Those are the ones who are relevant. Others might be a lot less relevant, right? So we need to be strategic. Third, thinking about trade-offs. In conservation, we're often very good at telling people, you should do this, you should do that, but not really explaining to them what's in it for them, right? Why should they make that change? Making a change is hard. So why should people change? What's in it for them? So then we need to really understand those trade-offs as well and what might be the costs of making the change that we're trying to get people to do. And the fourth one is just thinking about piloting and designing a campaign or an intervention of any kind. Very often we talk about media, we talk about social media, we talk about mass media, but it doesn't need to be like that. Sometimes you can have wonderful behavioral interventions that are in person, for example, or use other means, right? You know, theater, you might have, you know, other, you know, music, so lots of different ways, creative ways often of doing things. And so then the fifth, implementation, and then the sixth, to bring it all together, the evaluation that I just talked to you about. And so really those were really the key things, and very much like the previous chapter, we also have a case study where we bring together these different steps and talk about how we did follow this model in sort of a real world example. In this case, it's human-tiger conflict in Nepal. So wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Diogo, very much. And now we're going to go to seeing how countries intend to use this and whether they find it useful. So just to start off the discussion, we would like to ask everyone to share a bit about their major human wildlife conflict related issues in their national context, and then how do they intend to use these guidelines to build the capacity. And today, we have with us Deb Han from the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies from the States, Carlos Enrique Micho Lopez from Peru's National Forest and Wildlife Service, and Alexander Perovic from the Environmental Protection Agency of Montenegro. If you agree, we can start with Deb because you were first on the list, and then we can continue. Thanks.
Thanks, Luna. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. Just as a little explanation, many of you may not know my organization and who we work for, but we work on behalf of the subnational governments in the US and Canada. Those governments have the authority to manage wildlife in collaboration with our federal agencies. So when it comes to human-wildlife conflict, we work most closely and in collaboration with our USDA Department of Agriculture and our US Fish and Wildlife Service. So in 2022, we did a small survey to determine kind of what are the major sources of conflict. This was in the US, not in Canada. And first off were wildlife disease as a general overview, whether that was rabies or chronic wasting disease. General predator management related to livestock and human safety was another one, and that involves species such as black bears and grizzly bears, coyotes, mountain lions, and wolves. We also, another item that was raised was aquaculture by fish-eating birds, crop and livestock depredation, infrastructure, and then airport and aviation hazards, to name a few. We also do a lot of human-wildlife conflict work with feral swine and also invasive species of other invasive species. So we have a member on the specialist group, and we were excited about these guidelines. So we will be working alongside of our federal and tribal wildlife conflict managers through our National Committee on Human-Wildlife Conflict. And we will provide our managers with the access to these latest recommendations. And the way they work varies across the United States and certainly also across Canada. And so I think it'll be important for us to have a conversation of how these add value and where we can adjust some of our work to include some of these great recommendations and information in this report. So I think that's it, Luna, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thanks, Deb. That's exactly what we were looking for. Can I please ask now Enrique, if you can share a few thoughts?
Thank you. Thank you, Luna, and good evening. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for the invitation to be in this table. Well, actually, this is a very relevant topic in our country, and I want to begin from there, in the complexity of coming from a mega diverse country. I come from Peru in South America. We have the Andes mountain range pretty much carrying our country from north to south, which make different ecosystems and complex mega-diverse countries. The threats are very complex. So complex problems need complex solutions. That's something we have learned in this process. And then one major objective of the National Forestry Service and the Wildlife Department, that is the one where I am the director, is to change these conflicts into lessons learned, like walking through a path to promote the coexistence among people and wildlife. The principles that you just show us are really helping us in this path. These 5 principles, or do no harm, understand issues and context, work together at all levels, at different roles, with all the different actors that are in the field, integrating science and policy, and enable sustainable pathways, uh, like using good practices, but then the question is how? No, that's the main question: how to apply this to our own reality. So for successful ending and to have positive impacts while the application of all the guidelines. So we are using these guidelines as reference to build our own national guidelines that are now in process, and also we're building a national action plan. We're using them as reference all the time, but applying to our own reality. So also we're using them for strengthening and building capacities within our institutions and on the different levels of the government and of all the actors in the field, depending on the type of interactions. So we decide the approach because we have different kinds of interactions. It's different to talk about urban interactions, peri-urban interactions, predators that are like the most common or the most popular, but also among herbivores we have some conflicts that between wild grazers and livestock keepers. So all of these problems need different approaches to come. So. I can only say that we are under construction of our own guidelines, but we're using these ones as reference. And we congratulate for organizing you the first international conference that was made in April. No? And as I am in use of my time and of the floor, I would like to happily make an announcement that we are planning to make our first regional conference also on conflict. We hope to make it by the end of this year. We know this is a very busy year, so if possible, we're going to be launching it after the COP of Colombia. So let's hope that everything works fine and that we can discuss, because One World Congress is very important and relevant, but regional approaches are also very important. So we need this space to discuss. We are going to call it the first one and trying to give the lead then to the next one. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we're going to go to Europe, to Montenegro, and hear some reflections from Alexander.
Thank you so much. In these occasions, I really like to keep the things very simple. Firstly, I want to inform you that I'm the guy who is very often on the field, very often on the forest and the mountains, collecting the data and working with the large carnivores almost every day. And if you are talking about these guidelines, the first chapter for me is the communication. The first and the last and the middle, everything is the communication. Just to tell how is that. By my experience, when someone has a problem, for example, with the large carnivores, you are going there to speak with the people in the rural areas as someone who is scientist, yeah? But you can never approach the people on that level, because maybe you have the knowledge from the books, but they have the life experience of the sharing the same habitat with the large carnivores their life. And you need to find the solutions. And for example, I'm the member and the team leader of intervention team for the large carnivores in Montenegro, and me and my team have the guidelines how to react on the different situation. But believe me or not, 99% of all actions are finished with consensus between us and the local people, because we always ask what you think we should do in this situation. And that's the way how you define, I like to call it a red line. On one side it's the human beings, on the other side is the wildlife. And we need to tackle that red line that we cannot expose always the solutions, but to find the solution will be satisfactory and for the wildlife and also for the human beings. Something I read this guideline, and I will tell you that I find it very useful. Why? Because it's not so administrative. It's useful because it's not written only for one species. It can be useful for all species of the wildlife, but you need to have enough experience to to take the things from these guidelines in order to conduct it on the field. And believe me, there is no house, I'm self-confident, but I am telling the truth. There is no house in Montenegro, in the mountains, where I not knock on the door and speak with the people. And most of the situation when we have intervention teams, expect the situation when we have, for example, the brown bear in the middle of the capital of some big town, or the wolf, then there is then it's the different situation when we need to follow the protocol. But in the rural areas, a lot of these interventions are finished by the locals. And we need to support that idea to communicate with them and to find the solutions with them. And I think only with that approach we will be successfully on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks to everyone for contributing. We have a few minutes left, so I'm going to open the floor for questions, comments, suggestions. I see there's, do we have a mic in the back? You can use, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, that's it.
I think you might need to hold it while you speak.
Yes, hold it.
Thank you very much for the question. Guidelines.
I'm sorry, I will have to interrupt you again. Can we have the technical people help out with the mic? Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Zakaria Wambura. I'm coming from Tanzania. Regarding to the guidelines, what I wanted to say that the issue of human-wildlife conflicts differ between country and country and differ between continent and continent. If you come in the context of Africa, where there is a lot of diversity of wildlife and in particular larger mammal, the issue might be quite different. One of the biggest challenge I can say in my country, Tanzania, and probably in other African countries, is how to address the issue of human-wildlife conflicts. And this challenge comes because the conflict most occurs in the wildlife corridors and some in migratory routes when these animals move between protected area or move between ecosystems. And one of the biggest challenges, these corridors, you find they are in village lands. And we find the solutions maybe is to evict people. That is the best. But sometimes it has its implication to the international community. They say, oh no, this is against human rights, you are removing peoples. But sometimes we are thinking, you live there. For instance, the incidents in my country, average annually about around 9,000 acres of crops are destroyed. Almost 200 people are killed annually, either elephants or lions. So we are thinking as a conservationist, leaving people dying, crop damage leaving people with no food, wildlife causing food insecurities. Is that also a human right? So I just wanted to pose a question whether as a conservationist, international community, to think in a holistic way how to address this issue. In African context, the best alternatives is to remove people, either by compensation along the corridors where these animals pass. It's very difficult to control animals like elephants, animals like lions, which they are very clever. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that comment. I think it very well mirrors the scale and some of the issues that we mentioned before. And I think that the context-specific solution is always the right solution. So In some contexts, that might be the best solution, some others might not, but we all need to think about these very specific contexts when thinking. I see another question there, but I first want to see if there's anybody from the panel who wants to react to this. You good?
To be honest, it's not a simple question, you know, and you cannot, in this situation, you cannot make ad hoc solutions. You need always to look in the future and to be aware of all impacts of your decision. But still, it's a very good question for thinking and to finding a solution. And thank you very much.
Can you try to speak with that mic, and if it doesn't work?
Can you hear me? Oh, good. Amuramande. Everybody is so serious. But happy Valentine's Day, everybody. Today is the day of love, and we're here because we love nature, isn't it? We love animals. But my question is, I suppose I'll be speaking on behalf of the Land of Snow Leopard Network, which I'm very honored to lead for the past couple of 5 years. And the question is, we have the utmost respect for IUCN and our elders and indigenous spiritual leaders, indigenous cultural practitioners have had an opportunity to attend your congresses for almost a decade now and making their contributions. But the problem is that I'm seeing this graphs and so forth, but the conflict for us, I'd say, it's the translating the indigenous knowledge into scientific terms, the Western linear thinking, which obviously has immense value, and because of the Western science, you know, we have what we have. I can speak into this microphone and so forth. But it's very, very difficult to quantify unquantifiable. And honestly, every time I have to submit a report, every time I have to make an application for a grant, I die inside a little bit because, well, how am I supposed to, quantify these things, explain this? And I remember, unfortunately, doing a report for IUCN, it was a nightmare. So are you willing to come halfway with us and recognize, well, ceremony itself isn't an indicator of success. The fact that, the community gathered together for this, amount of time, and, they're, by being themselves up there, they're already mitigating the, the wildlife conflict. Maybe the stories and from the field, from the community, from the elders, and that experience is already valid enough rather than put it into this report form. Would you be willing to accept it?
Yeah, thank you very much for sharing those experiences. I guess on my end, I'd like to emphasize that, I mentioned and talked about evaluating impact, and there's really no reason why impact has to be numerical or quantitative. There are many ways you can translate impact qualitatively. And so that enables us to include narratives, enables us to include a wider range of evidence and information that comes from a wider range of stakeholders, and not just those that have been trained in a particular paradigm at a university or whatever that might be, right? So I think that's certainly a big concern on my side when I think about, as this project work, this activity achieved its aim, is to make it really clear that there's no reason why we have to go down a quantitative route. We can do as good of a job qualitatively, and that opens a lot of doors. I'll also just say that we do have a chapter on integrating indigenous knowledge within the guidelines, and I think that's also a recognition. It's certainly a starting point, and it remains a challenge, but it's a recognition of how important the specialist group sees, as a frontier for us to also learn and evolve, I think. And I think lastly, okay, good, wonderful.
And just one addition, we are a specialist group of the Commission. We're not IUCN as such. So the question is completely valid. It's just that I cannot answer it whether we can meet you halfway on reporting, because it's not us who you're reporting to. Any, please.
Yeah. Well, I just want to add, thank you very much for that very important topic that you bring into the table. And I apologize because I forgot to mention that, you know, our process of building our own national plan, our own national guidelines, are in consultant and permanent consultant with our indigenous and local communities and indigenous people. And we're trying to consider all the local knowledge and all the practices into us. That's what I thought it was understand when I mentioned the approach, and also when Alexander mentioned about going house by house. Okay, for us it's kind of difficult to do that because our country is kind of big, but we have like more than 70 different ethnic groups in our country that we're trying to include, and also include all the different cases to bring into the table, and also to consider that the indigenous and local knowledge is a different episteme. So the Western science may have their way to build knowledge, but indigenous people have their own ways to build knowledge. And that's what we mean, the like changing conflicts into coexistence, because it's something that our local people are doing for millennia. So to bring this into a plan, it's like a big task, but at the political level, it's necessary. Thank you.
We have time for one final intervention.
Yeah, very briefly. I'm John Paul Rodriguez from the IUCN Species Survival Commission. I'm sorry that we can talk about that. When we think of, or at least when I think of this theme, the image that comes to mind is a mammal raiding crops or killing people or grazing. But there are many, many other ways, other types of conflicts, you know, in the oceans and forests and freshwaters. And I wonder if you could mention 2 or 3 just to give flavor and people to think about how complex this theme is beyond these very classic examples.
Maybe I can mention one that I heard about only 2 days ago here, and it's about a plant species in Chile that captures the sheep. And it has a way of holding it, and it feeds on it after. Yeah. So that's a very interesting example that we never talk about. Then, and also when you think about even just the taxonomic group, more people die from snake bites than wolf attacks. But you know, it also depends on how fluffy and iconic the animal is with regards to what media attention it will get. But these are some examples that I can think of, and maybe somebody, Deb?
Yeah, I was also thinking of things like white nose syndrome that came out in our study of what people are dealing with from a human-wildlife conflict that you might not right away think of from a disease standpoint, and other invasive species, I guess, come to mind as well.
Okay, I think we have to go because there's another event happening here now. Thank you very much for attending. Thank you for your contributions. And please feel free to get in touch with us. Okay, can I ask for the presentation one last time? Okay. Doesn't matter. Look it up, Human-Wildlife Conflict and Coexistence Specialist Group. We have a website with a lot of resources and ways to get in touch. And thank you once again. Have a good day.